Morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. Are there announcements? Quick announcements. Or who knows how to use the mixing board? I'm feeding back. So. Thank you, Peter. Just a little nudge. I will point you to our yellow Windsor. Technically, this isn't summer worship, but this is when we tell you about it because it's basically summer worship, summer attendance plus Stephen. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. So check that out. We still have, there are 3-4 Sundays where there is no service. Otherwise, it's me this year. There's a number of reasons because of non-worship things that I'm working on for the church. So we're ready for the fall after our hiatus. So I'm here, so I go to worship as well. So hope to see you all. Stephen will be here. We just decided about half the Sundays, all the Sundays in August. If you're interested in hearing Stephen and not me and Lee hack away on our instruments, that would be when to do it. And then on the 11th of July, because the 10th is a big day. So, in case anyone doesn't know, the mask rule is, because you'll see Jackie and I have ours on, that's because we're performing official duties and we're in people's space and we wear them. But otherwise, masking is optional for everybody at this point. I think that's it. So today we will be, this is actually a repeat service. This is the last service we did before the pandemic, before we had to close the church. And I've had this sermon sitting over here on this table for a year and a half now. I was like, oh, we should just sort of do that to reset, see what we were thinking about. And in my head, I was like, oh, it'll be so different because we did so many other things. It turns out it's a sermon about prayer and justice, which is pretty much what we talked about through the pandemic. So it's not quite the revelation, but I thought it would be fun to do that anyway, so we're going to do that. The music, Stephen picked the same music. We did adjust the hymn just because I think we were tired of hymns. We just picked some weird ones that Sunday, which I actually like, oh, that's too bad. That's like, these are the last hymns we sang. So we picked one that was more thematic for the day. So that's what we're going to do. Just sort of, when you're thinking about the original origin of this, just remember that it's before the pandemic, and it was Lent. So it has that sort of Lent series rigor with lots of quotes, which isn't very summary at all, sorry. But that's all. So we'll be thinking about prayer and justice today. Let's take a moment to think on those things. please join in our covenant written in your order of service. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all. So our first reading is from, so it's an essay called We Love You, Edie Windsor. Edie Windsor was one of the people who challenged the Defense of Marriage Act. In fact, the case was Windsor versus United States. And it comes from this book, which I recommend to feel like super nerdy or into the law. You might be interested in this book. It's called Fight of the Century, and it was a fundraiser for the ACLU, and it's many, many, many tiny essays about important court cases written by famous fiction writers. So, it's kind of cool. My stepmom is in it, so I got a free copy. But there's other people you'd recognize in here. Michael Chabon is the editor. Eliot Wilderman was also the editor, and Neil Gaiman. So, people that people actually read, and just little things about the case that they really liked. But this one is by Andrew Sean Greer, and I won't read the whole thing, but just a little bit to get a sense of it. And I think, you're all pretty up on history. The Defense of Marriage Act was back in the day, meaning not that long ago, the 90s, referred to as DOMA, which is how he refers to it in his essay. We all knew what the decision meant. DOMA had just been ruled unconstitutional. It would be another 2 years before same-sex couples could legally marry in the United States, but by declaring DOMA unconstitutional, it was only a matter of time. A long, dark history of second-class citizenship was on the road to being abolished. I, reading the astonishing news from my room across the Atlantic, assumed, like many others, that full rights of all LGBT people would proceed from there. There was a sense, even among the most cynical, that the long, hard battle had been won forever. Even remembering the passionate disdain my friends and I felt for the idea of marriage, I don't blame us for celebrating Windsor 2.5 decades later. Maybe we got older and had partners and children of our own and enjoyed a little normality. Maybe, like so many generations before us, we started out as rebels and mellowed into good neighbors. But really, I think we were so tired of fighting, it felt good at last to win, and in some way hand over the fight to the next generation. But the last few years have proven that we cannot stop fighting. Our next reading is not in the order of service, but it exists. Apparently I was really into reading that Sunday. It's by William Schultz. William Schultz was past president of the UUA back in the 80s, and then he went on to become the president of, I can't remember. The group that we write letters for, like you write a letter, it'll come. What? I said the ACLU. No, that was the other one. It'll come to me. Sorry about that. He's really very important. We all try to remember William Schultz because it makes us feel good. No, I can't remember. Oh well. Amnesty International. There we go. Feels so much better. Sorry, Bill. All right. Religion and justice are born on each other's wings. What makes them such soulmates? Every single one of us knows what it is like to bleed. Every one of us has experienced pain. If that were not a fact of human existence, we might not notice the suffering of the world. But because it is, we do. Every single one of us knows what it is like to bleed. In one respect, pain is a gift because it cultivates our imagination. Without it, we would be far less likely to rail at deprivation or shrink from cruelty. In the heart of every stranger lurks a reflection of our own. So it's a big weekend. Yesterday was Juneteenth. Today is Father's Day. And we all, of course, come to church with our own concerns, our own hopes and dreams and wishes. So let's take a moment now in silence to pray for those in need of our prayers today. Now, as Jesus taught us, let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So our next reading is from Gospel of Luke, chapter 18. It's a parable. I think most of you will recognize. It's an interesting one, and there's a lot of ways you can sort of tease it out depending on what you're thinking about today, particularly given our topic. So here it is. Jesus told the disciples a parable on the necessity of praying always and not losing heart. Once there was a judge in a certain city who feared no one, not even God. A woman in that city who had been widowed kept coming to the unjust judge and saying, "Give me justice. Grant me justice from my opponent." For a time, the judge refused. But finally, the judge thought, "I care little for God or people, but this woman won't leave me alone. I better give her the protection she seeks, so she'll keep coming and wear me out." So Jesus said, "Listen to what this corrupt judge is saying. Won't God then do justice to the chosen who call out day and night? Will God delay long over them? I tell you, God will give them swift justice. But when the promised one comes, will faith be found anywhere on earth?" Now let's turn to our responsive reading, number 576. If, recognizing the interdependence of all life, we strive to build community, the strength we gather will be our salvation. If you are black and I am white, if you are female and I am male, if you are older and I am younger, if you are progressive and I am conservative, if you are straight and I am gay, if you are Christian and I am Jewish, if we join spirits as brothers and sisters, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened, and that does matter. In the spirit of your community, move toward restoration. promised Jackie that I would tell her that this was the time to plug in the coffee. You all said, nice. All right, we're doing well. So I want to start today by thinking a little bit about that reading from Luke, because for a parable, it's pretty direct. When one reads it and studies it even casually, two messages rise naturally from it. In fact, the words are used in the reading. And one of those messages has to do with prayer, and the other has to do with justice. Prayer and justice. Which might, for some people, particularly Americans in this century, come off as rather strange. Because in the dominant mainstream culture, it has become second nature to us to take those things that are meant to drive our lives, namely our beliefs, our deeply held beliefs, religious, relational, and spiritual ones, and internalize them as much as possible, making them solely matters of the heart. It is in our societal, cultural nature to keep them inside, restricting them for the time set aside for ritual. Days like today. Times set aside for meditation and for worship. As opposed to the time we spend, the rest of the time, actually living our lives. And then we are meant to fill that remaining space that is created by internalizing our beliefs. We fill that remaining space, particularly out in public, with a much more pragmatic, rational, self-contained, and self-interested worldview. As we plan or campaign or vote for our vision of a just society and our place in it, we expect or are expected to compromise, mostly, to keep achievable goals for ourselves and others, rather than to dream big dreams of the commonwealth of heaven. But what if we didn't always compromise? That's what I love about this parable, because that's the question the parable asks. It gives us nowhere to hide in our comfortableness. It is, in fact, a confrontation between the ideals of our hearts and the so-called practical world we are meant to live in. So in this story, this woman goes to the unjust judge, and says, grant me justice. Grant me justice against my opponent. But the judge is busy. The unjust, busy judge. Too busy with schemes of his own, and he puts her off. He waves her away. Why should he, a great and powerful politician, take any time to hear the concerns of someone else? A woman who has been wronged, possibly by somebody just as unjust as he. But we know in this story, short story, that she persisted. She came back and back and back again. Grant me justice, she said. She persisted. And after a long time and many trials, she won. Through faith and action. As William Schultz, past president of the UUA, writes, religion and justice are born in each other's wings. Religion and justice are born in each other's wings. That's born with an E, in case you haven't figured that out. Now, the unjust judge wasn't actually won over to her side, was he? The scales didn't fall from his eyes. Instead, he did the right thing because he was forced to do the right thing. Her activity made him acknowledge the legitimacy of her case, as well as her right to bring that case. That is, he had to recognize her humanity and the humanity of those she represented. Now, often this parable is also presented as a funny story about the importance of a regular prayer life. In one reading of this tale, the story is there to remind us that in the midst of this secular world, we need to find ways to connect with the spiritual one, to energize, refresh, and refuel ourselves by banging relentlessly on the gates of heaven. And you know, the story works that way too. It's a parable. It's got many meanings. The image of billions of people petitioning a grumpy Judeo-Christian God is both compelling and entertaining. But it's important to remember that Jesus here isn't making an equivalency between the unjust judge and God. According to pastor and theologian Reverend Cynthia Hale, we do not have to beg God for anything. We do not have to beg God for anything. God is more likely to bless us than we are to ask. I have to say, though, that Jesus does seem more than a little too optimistic in the story he tells about how that asking for justice will go. I tell you, he says, God will quickly grant justice. Quickly grant justice. But that isn't how it feels today, or even most days, because the world we live in is a world of unjust judges, and in ways too numerous to recount in full, it feels much of the time like they are winning. In our reading from Andrew Sean Greer today, he contrasts the joy he felt at the Supreme Court ruling on the Defense of Marriage Act with the struggles that have followed. I think we were so tired of fighting, he writes. It felt good at last to win. But the last few years have proven that we can't stop fighting. The last few years have proven that we can't stop fighting. That is the message of many of my friends this Juneteenth holiday weekend, actually. We cannot stop demanding justice. The unjust judge will only give us just enough to make us go away. True and full justice is never really on the table. So the question for us today and every day is, when we read this parable as a justice parable, the question is, how do we be like this woman? How do we persist in the face of injustice? How do we keep ourselves on that road when there are so many ways to step off? So it's a good thing that this is also a parable about prayer. For prayer and meditation, or rather the connection to the divine, or whatever we want to call what we conceive of as greater than ourselves, that intentional connection is what sustains us when we are weary and sick at heart, when the struggle has gotten us down. Now, Jesus is clearly talking about a particular kind of prayer here, prayer in relation to God. But I don't necessarily think that belief in a clearly articulated power is necessary to gain the benefits of the discipline of prayer. In the parable, it is all about the woman, after all. She puts in the effort and gains the reward. She has the clarity of vision that comes from within. However, she's not granted this from some higher power. She makes it for herself. We don't have to believe in God to pray. We just need to be capable of caring. We just need to be capable of caring. In one of the churches I served before coming to Eliot, we used a covenant arranged by the Universalist minister L. Griswold Williams. You can find it in the gray hymnal right above our own, actually. And it began, "Love is the doctrine of this church." Love is the doctrine of this church. A classic Universalist statement. And then it went on to say, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. Service is its prayer. In our tradition, service itself can be the prayer. In fact, advocacy and caring for others is a legitimate and well-worn path toward enlightenment and better understanding in many faiths. Justice and prayer are inextricably linked in this way. If we wish to seek and be sustained by a greater vision, then we are compelled to serve. We are compelled to work for that vision, to immerse ourselves in it, giving of ourselves and receiving from others even as we give. That said, to serve prayerfully, it requires a certain attitude and approach. It isn't just helping people. Many times, those of us with a little power or a lot of power will do things for others, risking no more than the judge risks, yet expecting some recognition for our contributions in return. In the process of prayerful service, however, we have to give up that power and that expectation as we walk with our fellow human beings. Otherwise, we are no better than that unjust judge who ultimately does the right thing for the wrong reasons. So prayerful service requires humility. It requires humility. William Schultz tells us that in the heart of every stranger lurks a reflection of our own. In the heart of every stranger lurks a reflection of our own hearts. Seeing our shared connection, setting aside what we often see as our ample qualifications, giving up any privileged place we might hold to walk with the other as equals, as fellow travelers on the paths of life, this is prayer through service. It helps us see the heart of the stranger and our own heart through them. We are not drained by this process, though our egos may fight it. We are renewed. We are renewed by what we share. The Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley, reminds us in our reading today that if we join spirits as brothers and sisters, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened. In the Spirit, she says, we build community and restoration. And we do, or we can, because this prayerful humility leads also to empathy, to seeing someone else's suffering. Maybe not understanding it entirely, but understanding its validity in a way that the unjust judge never will. Empathy keeps us from wallowing in our own pain or focusing on the barriers we have overcome. Instead, we can look back at our own trials and use them to better understand and experience the trials of other people. The minister and activist Michael Eric Dyson addresses this in his book, Tears We Cannot Stop, saying that empathy must be cultivated. Do not tell us, he says, how we should act if we were you. Imagine how you would act if you were us. It sounds simple, he says, but its benefits are profound. In a world where so many people cry out for justice, we need to find ways to make a practice, not of judging, nor of fixing things for others, but instead of seeing ourselves in the midst of all of creation and crying out for justice together. Amen. And now, we get to sing. So, Stephen, before you start, I think I picked the most complicated hymn in the book. Right? So there's like a chorus. Are we starting with the chorus? Or no?
Let me see. I don't know.
Okay. Just tell us which one.
I was going to start with page 2 and then you start with page 1. Does that make sense?
Yep. So y'all got that? We're starting with Come Build the Land, essentially the chorus.
And then Promised Land that will be is where I'm going to start.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, I'll start. I like that. I'll start with the second line. Okay. Come Build the Land.
Okay. Please rise. Because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Amen and blessed be.